2005 Mazda MPV spark plug replacement. I'm Brian Essick from How To Automotive, and I'm going to walk you through that process. We'll get started by removing the top engine cover. So it looks like there's a couple of 8mm bolts here and here. Go ahead and remove those. Okay, to get to the back spark plugs under is we have to remove this upper plenum, or the upper intake portion of this to get to the rear spark plugs. So I'm going to start by removing the air box, or the air cleaner. So I'll unhook it here and here. I'll take the clamp off here and remove the hoses here and remove the tin here, and just take this little bracket off and unplug all my electrical connectors and just remove the whole hoses. You'll also have to remove the vacuum line going to the vacuum switch here, and then just have a little squeeze clamp on there and pull that off and kind of twist the line off, and also disconnect the electrical connector here. So my next step is to remove the 10mm bolt here and the two tins here to hold the throttle cables down. And then after you get those unbolted, then I'm going to remove the 4 bolts that hold the throttle body on. I'm not going to disconnect the cables or anything. I'll just leave them on there. Or if you want to, you can. All you do is, so when you take this off, just go ahead and leave all the hoses and electrical connectors connected to it. And you, like I said, you take those brackets out. So now you can kind of just move it out of your way. And you can go ahead and unplug the idle air control motor here. After you get that off, then you can go ahead and remove the vacuum hose for the brake booster. Go ahead and pop that off here. When you go to take the brake booster off, don't take the squeeze clamp off. If you push this little black clip here downwards and push the nipple in, so like normally it won't come out like that, but if you push down here at the same time, you can lift up on the pipe, and it'll come out as a whole like that. And now, after you got the brake booster hose off, on the passenger side, there's a little electrical connector right here. This controls a little motor that's inside the intake manifold. So you want to disconnect the electrical connector here, and then right underneath the electrical connector is this little bracket to hold the wire loom on, and it has a little screw that's right there. So go ahead and remove that screw. The next step is to remove the EGR valve. So there's going to be 2 bolts. So both bolts are coming, this way in. So remove the 2 12s here and a little bit further in. Remove those 2 12s, and also be prepared to catch the gasket, and it may fall out right here. And you also may want to reorder the gasket here. You're also going to order the throttle body gasket and the upper plenum gasket when you order these parts, along with your spark plugs. And after you get the EGR valve unbolted, right under it is going to be a support bracket. Let's see if I can get this in here. And you can see the bolt down here directly underneath the EGR valves on that little black bracket. So you'll unbolt that screw right there. Once you get the EGR valve unbolted, you don't need to, that's all you need to do is take out the 2 12s and just kind of push it back a little bit. And that's all you need to do. You don't need to take it out any more than that. Just unbolt it from the manifold and then remove the bolt right here. So now that your EGR valve is unbolted and the little support bracket underneath, now you can go ahead and remove the 8mm bolts that hold the plenum down. So there's going to be one here, one here, one here, here, and then one right here, and then one right there. And now there's some below it. You don't need to remove those, just the ones that are kind of higher. So once you get it unbolted, then you're going to take the power swing hose, and on the back it's tucked into this little bracket, little here. So you want to pop it out of that little bracket and then the hose was originally mounted over here, so you just kind of flip it over to the side like this. And then on the very back, see if I can get the camera vector free, there's a hose for the PCV, and you can just, what you do is you reach your hand around back like this behind the EGR valve, and you can get to it, and it's a hose for the looks like it goes for the PCV. So I get this camera back here, and you can see it right can see the hose right here, and my hand is touching it. So you're going to pop this hose off. It goes up to the intake manifold. And once you get that hose popped off, looks like you just separate it right here, like that. Once you get that separated, so now there's one more support bracket here in the back, kind of next to our little bracket here. You take a mirror, shine it in there, as get it adjusted right. You can see the bracket right there. So you're just basically going to get an 8mm socket wrench, and you're just going to reach around. I'm on the passenger side here. You reach around the back right here, and then unbolt the little 8mm bracket right here. You kind of just do it by feel. Once you get that last support bracket unbolted back here, now you can just kind of just lift and maneuver the intake outlet of the car. When I was maneuvering it out, there was a couple coolant hoses attached to it. I didn't feel like disconnecting them, so I'm just going to set it up, lift it out of my way out of here. Now I can get to my coils back here and unbolt my coils. So this was that one support bracket that was holding us up back here, and then mount it right here on the back of the intake. So before I get started ripping the coils out of it and the spark plugs out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these ports, and I'm going to put a little, I'm going to put some rags in there, stuff some rags in there, and that way as I'm working, nothing falls down in here. And also before I do that, I'm going to look down in there and make sure that nothing, as I took it out, nothing fell in, no debris fell in. Just double check that real quick, and then I'm going to stuff rags in there so nothing falls in. Now that I got my little rags in there so nothing falls in, I'm going to just push the squeeze tabs on all the coils and unplug them like that. So unplug all 3 coils back here, and then go ahead and remove all 3 8mm. And I'm going to take the coils out, take them out, and I'm going to set them somewhere. I'm going to set them in order the way they came out. And then I'm also going to do the exact same thing for the front, so you may just maneuver the things out of your way. So I'll plug all the coils like so, and go ahead and remove all the 8s and remove the coils out and set those aside for now. Now that you get your coils off, go ahead and remove your spark plugs. And I like to remove spark plugs by hand. I'm not a big fan of using power tools, especially on aluminum cylinder heads. I've seen it where the threads actually get pulled out of the block of the cylinder head and creates a mess. And it was done with power tools, and I've never had a problem, never seen a problem if it's all done by hand with hand ratchets. That's just my preference. So after pulling your spark plugs out, and if you see this, where there's a bunch of oil all over the spark plug, now you have pretty much the only fix is to recommend valve cover replacement. The tube seals here inside the valve covers are leaking, and you need to remove the valve covers and replace the gaskets and seals. So this video went from a spark plug replacement to now it's a valve cover replacement. So basically what we're going to do now is continue on to remove the valve covers off. So we're just going to remove all the bolts going around the valve covers, and there's all the way around, and then there's going to be a couple in the center. And on the front one there's also going to be this vent hose. You have to remove it, and it might actually be easier to pop it off from the other end. And actually it's already off. Yeah, so go ahead and remove all the 10mm bolts that are holding the valve cover on, front and rear. To get to the bolts that are on the inside over here, what I use is a setup like this. So I use a wobbly with a deep pin, and then you can get it right around the back like so. And you get right on the bolt, and you can spin it off. So once you get all the bolts out, what I did was I took a little pry bar right here in the corner. I just gave it a little pry and popped the valve cover free. Now what I'm going to do is just kind of hold this stuff out of my way, and then kind of lift it up and in towards the middle of the engine and then out of the car. So now that I got the valve cover off, you can see the seals in the center of the valve cover here. That's what's leaking. So go ahead and set this aside for now. It's going to be the same process to remove the back valve cover The only difference is you may have a few brackets, kind of like this one in your way. You might have to maneuver out of your way. You may have to flip the wiring harness here, kind of up and out of the way, and you may even have to like push the bracket back a little bit, or follow it down and loosen it up a little bit to get them out. But what I always like to do is always try to get the valve covers out first, without removing any extra stuff. And if it fights me or whatever, then I go ahead and remove whatever I need to remove to get the valve cover out of the car. So the same thing, you're gonna take them out and then you're gonna pop, you probably right here in the corner, pop it up with a pry bar, and you're gonna kind of lift it up towards the center of the car, and then you may have to twist it to get it out of the car. So once you get that out, then after you get that out, what we're gonna do is we're gonna clean up the surfaces. So you're gonna clean out all the mating surfaces where the gaskets go, and see how this has got all the debris. You want to clean that in a way where it goes away from the inside of the motor, so you want to clean away. Get that all cleaned up, and in the corners and stuff it may have silicone. You might want to scrape the silicone off, and then we'll do that for both cylinder heads. And then the tubes, what I usually do is I usually just take a rag like so, and put it in there, and then use like a screwdriver to push the rag in there on and clean out the tubes. Now that I got the back valve cover out, you can see the wire loom I was telling you about. For the main harness, it was bolted on top of the valve cover. So you'll definitely be taking that off to get the valve cover out. And I just, once you got it out, you kind of just maneuver things out of your way and kind of work it out. So when you go back in, you may even want to have help, and they can like hold the wiring loom out of the way as you route it in there and put it back in. But the first step is to clean everything up. And once you got everything cleaned up, if you haven't by now, you can go ahead and install your spark plugs and tighten those down. So as you can see, some of the wire harness stuff is laying now over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the back one first, clean it all up, put the valve cover on, bolt everything back up to the valve cover that came off of it, all the wire looms and brackets and stuff like that they were attached to it. I'll bolt that one up first, and then I'll take all this mess here and I'll flip it over onto the top of the that valve cover, and then I'll clean this one all up and put this valve cover on and put all the brackets and wire looms back on. Then I'll maneuver the front end and drop it down over the timing chain and cams there. One of the things I discovered is this main wiring loom that went here, you can unplug it and then you can fold it completely out of the way, and this one can fold completely out of your way over here, like so. Now it gives you an even better clean shot at putting the valve cover in. So now that I got the valve cover in there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my mirror like this and check all the way around the valve cover, and make sure that my gasket didn't fall off or fall inside. And once I'm satisfied that my gasket's in place, I will then what I'll do is I'll take the old bolts, and I will change out these blue washers. They're rubber grommets here. The kit came with a bag full of the new ones, so I'll change those out, and then I'll go ahead and, after those are changed out, then you just go ahead and start all your bolts by hand. And once they're all started by hand, then I'll torque them down, and what I'll do is I'll tighten them from the middle. So I'll tighten the middle one, and then I'll go to an outer, outer, middle, outer, outer, and so on until they're all tight. And some of these is going to be really difficult to get a torque wrench or anything like that on, so I'm going to tighten them down by feel. And basically you're going to feel the gasket crush down or flatten out a little bit, and you'll go basically until this little end of the bolt here will bottom out. And once it's bottomed out, that's pretty much, you just give it a quarter turn more or so, and that's pretty much all you need to do to tighten these up. So now I got my valve cover mounted back on, bolted back up. I went ahead and, the spark plugs were already in there. Went ahead and mounted the coil, put the wiring harness back in, mounted the wiring harness onto the coil pack. The wiring harness that was back here, the loom, went ahead and put that back on and bolted it back down. the wiring harness that I unplugged over here, went ahead and plugged it back together, and this bracket bolts to the side of the intake, so we just leave this floating for right now. So now that that's all done, now I'm gonna position the all this stuff that's on the front valve cover kind of laying over here. I'm gonna flip it back over in there, and I'm gonna duplicate the same thing. I'll replace the gas. Okay, now that we got our front valve cover back on, coils and spark plugs and coils back in and plugged in, now what we need to do is just change out our gaskets here for the intake. So put new gaskets on, and then what we're going to do is lift this throttle cables and stuff out, and then go ahead and set the intake manifold back on top of the lower intake. Now that you got the intake routed back in there, you can go ahead and start your bolts here. And what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and torque this intake down. And the way you're going to do it is you're going to start here. So it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you'll torque them down, and the torque spec's pretty low actually. It's only at 10 foot-pounds or 105 inch-pounds. So after you torque your intake manifold down, what I like to do is start in the back in the support bracket here. Go ahead and put your bolt that went in there. Start that and tighten that down. And then you can take your power steering hose that went in the little loom back here. Go ahead and tuck that back into the loom. Plug in the electrical connector here. Remount the little bracket here. And kind of just work your way counterclockwise around, making sure everything is plugged in the way it's supposed to go. And you're happy with everything, and once you're satisfied with that, then after that you're gonna put a new throttle body gasket on and bolt the throttle body back on, and then flip your cables back into place and bolt those back on. So after getting the throttle body all bolted up, next is the little support bracket right here underneath. You can bolt that up, and then go ahead and bolt your EGR valve back up. So now, now that I got the EGR valve bolted back up, I'm gonna take my brake booster vacuum hose, reinsert that. So I'll put it back in the clip here, and then this just pushes back in, and that's it. And then just lock it down. Now that I got that done, what I'm gonna do is get my mirror out, and I'm gonna look around back and double check anything that I may have left unplugged or whatever in the back here. And once I'm confident that all the mounts, bolts, everything is repositioned back in, then I'll start reassembling the air cleaner itself. Now's a good time to change the air filter too while you're at it. Now that you got the air box back in, now you can go ahead and plug everything back into it, like the vent line. Plug that back in. You plug the electrical connectors for the vacuum switch, the mass airflow sensor. Plug them all back in. So now that you've verified that all the electrical connectors are hooked back up, and you've used the mirror and kind of searched around and made sure you didn't forget anything, the last step would be to put the top engine cover on, and then fire it up and you know, check for codes or anything like that. Also double check your work for leaks.